Since the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion, hundreds of thousands of men have volunteered to defend their country against the Russians. But now, 1.5 years later, Ukraine needs to fill the ranks through conscription. Some Ukrainians are refusing to fight and looking for ways to leave. DW's Max Zander filed this report from the southern border with Romania.
Romania is just across the border from here, but most Ukrainian men cannot cross over, at least not legally. Martial law requires men of fighting age to stay in the country. Forged documents are one way of leaving. Thick forests and mountain passes are another. More than 15,000 have been detained in Ukraine while trying to illegally cross into Romania. These border guards are trying to stop them. Tonight, Volodymyr and Vasil are in charge of securing a 12-kilometer strip to enforce the law and save lives.
This is a marshy area. You can get lost here. There are wild animals, bears. You can run into a bear in the forest.
24 bodies have been found in Ukraine's southern border region since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion, we are told. The route used to be popular among cigarette smugglers, but now it's mostly used by people trying to leave.
Dodgers, refugees. Smugglers are afraid because of martial law. They are afraid that we will detain them and immediately book them, find them and take them to the recruitment center,
where they will be processed and potentially sent to fight. Ukraine needs soldiers. This billboard in the nearby city of Chernivtsi says, "You can do more than you think." In the beginning of the war, hundreds of thousands joined the armed forces as volunteers. 1.5 years later, many of them are exhausted, wounded, or dead. Most new recruits are drafted. Despite overwhelming public support for the Ukrainian military, not everyone is willing to become part of it. Men between 18 and 60 can be called up for military service, but there are a number of exemptions, such as for fathers of at least 3 children, essential workers, and those taking care of a sick parent. And then there are medical exemptions, and this is how most people dodge the draft. Thousands of men are believed to have left the country through bribing officials. Criminal groups advertise their services on Telegram. Confirming a disability, for example, can cost up to $3,500. This is only possible with the help of officials. In August, the heads of all regional military recruitment centers were dismissed as part of a larger move against corruption in the defense sector.
We cannot say that it was total corruption. These were rather isolated cases. We say that we have zero tolerances for cases of corruption or other violations. Of course, there is a human factor, but we try to respond to any problems.
But some Ukrainian men do question why they should serve and are determined to find ways to avoid being drafted, such as Maxim. The 22-year-old tattoo artist says he supports the military, but he himself won't fight.
I think having our own country is much more valuable than being a refugee somewhere. But the price they are asked to pay, disability or death, is higher than the value of having a country. I would rather be a refugee than die. And there's no guarantee that the country will exist after my death.
He tells us he will leave if necessary. I want to know how he feels about fellow Ukrainians who can't, such as those living under Russian occupation.
I can go to war only for one reason, only for my friends and relatives. I don't know people, for example, from Luhansk. They don't know me and have never seen me. Basically, they don't exist for me. And I don't exist for them. It's a very strange idea to fight for people I've never even met.
Back at the border, Volodymyr and Vasil haven't found any traces of illegal crossings yet. In August alone, though, authorities prevented 247 crossings along the border.
Everyone has their own opinion. I fought myself. I know how it was there. I do not wish for anyone to be there, because it is not easy. Everyone has their own destiny, and everyone makes their own decisions.
He cannot judge them, he tells us. But like the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians who are fighting the Russians, they too have a duty and are committed to fulfill it.
Let's get comment on this from our correspondent, Nick Connelly, joining me from Kyiv. Nick, we saw in that report there border guards trying to stop Ukrainian men from crossing illegally into Romania. If those border guards had caught someone, what would the consequences be?
Well, some people are sent to jail. We have jail sentences of 2 or 3 years pretty regularly. Many are just sent directly to the draft office to be sent to fight. But that often raises kind of mixed responses from the people on the front lines. On the one hand, they have been fighting often since the beginning of the war and don't see why other people shouldn't. But equally, some people say it is a privilege to defend one's country and they don't want people there. They don't want to rely and have their lives depending on people doing their job if they don't want to be there. So it's a very difficult and very emotional subject, but certainly it is a pretty dangerous journey that we saw there in that report, trying to cross the border, and lots of people have lost their lives trying to do so.
And just give us a sense of perspective here. Do we know how widespread this really is?
There aren't kind of good figures from the Ukrainian government. I think there's very little in it for them to make this more transparent. We get a sense that this is a question of maybe tens of thousands of people in a country of about 40 million. So it's not hugely significant in terms of statistics. And obviously there are people who are inside the country who haven't tried to leave, who have just claimed some kind of medical disability falsely, who are trying to lie low in country. I think this is more important in terms of the morale, what it does to the sense of fairness. People often, when you speak to them on the front lines, people in their 50s and 60s saying that when they do come back to Kiev for a quick holiday, they see all these men in their 20s with their gym bags out enjoying life. Why should I be risking my life every day if they're not doing their bit? Part of this is about the kind of organization. It is very difficult to train people to fight, and it is easier to leave people in place than to train new people. But it's certainly something that gets emotions raised. You see that on social media here in Ukraine, and it is a real kind of hot button issue for lots of people.
Yeah, as you say, it's a difficult subject. Of course, in the beginning of the war, you had Ukrainian men lining up to volunteer. Do you in any way see this as a sign that Ukrainians are tiring of the war?
I think certainly people are tired. I think people will tell you that they were basically carried on a wave of adrenaline the first half year or so, and now they're really noticing the impact it's having on their health, and they're having to kind of really make sure to kind of conserve their energy because they know this can go on for years. I don't see this yet as kind of translating into people being willing to cut some kind of deal with Russia and allow Russia to kind of hold on to what it has kind of bitten out of Ukraine. There's no call for peace, but certainly people are worried about the resources and about foreign support. But I don't see it kind of being kind of socially acceptable to say you don't want to fight for your country. That kind of voice we heard there in the report is still very much the minority, and people who have those opinions are often very careful about expressing them, because this is still a kind of extraordinary kind of consensus in this country that this is the thing that the country has to do, this is what it needs to get through, and for now those voices are still pretty isolated.
Let's get the view from Ukraine now and bring in Lisa Yasko. She is a member of the Ukrainian Parliament and the Foreign Affairs Committee. Thank you so much for your time. Why does Ukraine need a draft? Is it running out of soldiers?
Well, good afternoon. In fact, now I'm not in Ukraine. I'm in a Warsaw Security Forum where we are actually discussing different security issues and the challenges for Ukraine and all Europe. Your question is very important for us because soon we'll enter the day of 600 days of the war. And many of our soldiers, many men and women are there, the front line without rotation. Many of them are killed. Many of them are injured. Many of them are without legs and hands now. And unfortunately, we see that the war is not over yet. There is no victory tomorrow, that it will take much longer time. And we rely a lot on the assistance that is given to us from different countries. And for preparation for our victory, of course, we need to have rotation. We need to have well-educated, well-trained people who are ready to fight in this war. And to allow those who are now not able to fight, so that they have some rest at this moment.
But the question is also one of willingness to fight. And presumably if you have conscription, that means that you do have men who do not wish to fight. One of the men in our report, who our reporter spoke with, he said, and I'm quoting here, I would rather be a refugee than to die because there's no guarantee that my country will exist after my death. When you hear things like that, do you understand him?
Definitely, I understand him. And I can tell you that the fact that he said that if there is a guarantee that if I die, my country will exist, that's also a very important part of what he said. This is what we hear very often from people who are now at the front line, that if they give their life for the freedom of Ukraine, they want a victory. And this is the reason why any kind of frozen war is not possible. We have to have the victory so that there is no aggression coming from the Russia again, because these people who give their lives for our land, you know, they paid a huge price. They're paying a huge price, and we cannot say no to them, because it's very bitter, tragic history we're going through now. But we have to do it for our children, because then if we don't do it, then our children will not live in freedom, or as he said, maybe then the country will not exist, because Russia will take everything and will start a war in Poland, in other countries. This is very possible if we don't get a victory and justice on Ukrainian territory.
I'd like to ask you about another point that we saw in our piece there. Our reporter found that men are bribing, or some men are bribing officials and are using groups on Telegram to acquire fake medical exemptions. First of all, are you aware of this matter, and what might await people who are caught doing this?
Look, Ukrainian society is incredibly sensitive to injustice, and it's not like we are aware. We know so many cases, if they happen, that it's unjust, and we have zero tolerance to any kind of corruption. So these cases are very well known if they happen, and there are certain investigations that are going, and we voted for a lot of laws, and the President Zelensky did a lot of things personally from his side to make sure that there is zero corruption tolerance.
So how far is Kyiv willing to go here, would you say? Because, I mean, it seems that at this point in the war, force is the only way to replenish the Ukrainian army.
What do you mean by getting
For
more
example,
people in
you know,
army,
the enforcement
or are you
against
asking about the corruption?
Corruption, the enforcement against draft dodgers, for example. How far is Kyiv willing to go?
We are going to go till the end. There should be no corruption, and we have a lot of people who really want to fight. We don't have a problem with those who you know, these cases that you said, they are individual cases. Unfortunately, they happen, and unfortunately, this is the war. So there are always cases of those people who don't want to fight. Maybe there could be good solutions for them to serve for Ukraine, but maybe in the unit where they will feel that they can contribute much more than just taking a gun and shooting. And we're working on that. We have lots of, you know, we voted for the law some time ago when everyone could actually join the territorial unit of defense, and there are a lot of different things people can do there, starting from, I don't know, reconnaissance, some analytical work, and ending, of course, with doing incredibly technological things with drones, with and real fighting. And so we have, of course, a problem with distribution of this work. And since we are attacked massively every day, of course, things don't go perfect. But I truly believe that we don't have problem with the number of people that want to fight, but we do have a problem with individual cases of corruption, and we do have a problem with the massive propaganda coming from Russia that says that, you know, Ukrainians don't want to fight because it will affect Ukrainian society psychologically. But Ukraine society, of course, is tired, but still very much united. And absolute majority, I don't know anyone who would say that let's do any kind of dialogue, because we know that there is no dialogue with Russia possible, and because there is a real aggression against our nation. They want to kill all of us. How can we talk to them? It's not possible. So unfortunately, we have to fight till the end.
All right, I want to pull in now military analyst Frank Ledwidge. He joins us from Oxford in the UK. Frank, it's good to see you again. At the start of this war, Ukrainian men, you remember it, they were lining up to volunteer. Since then, the number of draft dodgers has been rising. Is it running out of soldiers?
Well, Brent, good evening. The answer is, I think, no. And this is quite a normal sequence, isn't it, in wars like this? At first, you get the regular army, then you call up the reserves, then you get some volunteers, and then you move to mobilization. And this happens again and again and again. I think, to be fair to Ukraine, what's remarkable in this is that it's how few the numbers are compared with Russia, which we may speak about later. And I think, to be fair, though, to those guys trying to get out, again, that's normal. It's not normal to want to necessarily, if you're not inclined to do so initially, to want to go and fight. However, I think there has been something of a change in the air, particularly since earlier this year, with particularly, it was mentioned there, with the Bakhmut campaign, which was definitely seen as a meat grinder. And I suspect that really did have an impact on recruitment.
And are you saying that the morale that we're seeing now, is this is a normal development, or is there anything that stands out about what we're seeing among Ukrainian soldiers?
I think, to be fair, what stands out, I'll say this again, is how few the draft dodgers and deserters are. However, I think a sense of resignation is coming, but that resignation is coupled, at least with the people I talk to, that might be skewed slightly, but I don't think so, with a sense of really firm, grim, brutal, bloody determination in the wider society, but also a sense of reality in those who are, in the not only in the firing line themselves, but those who are in line to be called up. And I think you saw some of that in the report there.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, if this could work to Russia's advantage anyway, but we have to also consider the fact that there are, as you've said earlier, lots of Russian men who are dodging the draft the best way they can.
Yeah, it's a different magnitude there. For every one soldier the Russians managed to mobilize in the last mobilization, and of course they won't be doing any more for quite a while, because the last one wasn't entirely successful, and there are political reasons for them not to repeat it. But for every one mobilized soldier, there are 3 deserters, and by that I mean people who got across the border, hundreds of thousands, and that's the scale the Russians face. Nothing like what the Ukrainians are talking about. As they say, they're a couple of hundred on that one crossing point, and I suspect no more in other places.
Military analyst Frank Ledwidge. Frank, it's always good to get your analysis. We appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.